I wanted to, first of all, thank you all for braving the weather and being here with us today to honor our friend Juan Osuna. In a way, I was telling Ben it was about the easiest conference we've ever had to organize because everybody you called up and they just said, yes, of course we're going to come to honor Juan. And I think one of the greatest tributes has been the amount of time and kind of energy people have poured into this event, into the papers, into the participation in it. Another is how far some of you have traveled, from Texas and Michigan and Chicago. And I think we have somebody from California here and New York and everywhere. So thank you for being here. People clearly want to do justice to this good man and to his legacy. And we thought that, a good way to do it, almost a perfect way to do it, would be to organize an event on the issues and on the values and the institutions that he cared about. And they are the rule of law, immigration courts, judicial review, legal representation, due process, access to justice, refugee protection and asylum. As I was thinking about this, I thought about all of Juan's gifts and what were they? Of course, the gift of a loving wife and family first and foremost. He had the gift of friendship, we're all here. The gift of good work, which is a great joy to have in life. The gift of vision, the gift of humor and that crazy infectious smile that he had, the gift of intellect, the gift of humility. He was a very accomplished man, but also very accessible and adept at putting people at ease. And he also had these great gifts as a public servant, and among them was a passion for always doing better, a genuine concern for his colleagues, and the ability to see beyond whatever his particular job or bureaucracy happened to be at that point and view the immigration system and the criminal justice system as kind of this integrated whole. So, but I'd like to speak in particular to two gifts which I think were really distinguish him. And those were the gifts of magnanimity and the gifts of empathy. His willingness to try to understand the perspective of others and to ascribe good motives to others, even those that he differed with. I think the divisiveness in this country right now is really anathema to him. And our issue in our community seemed to be ground zero for all of that nastiness at this point. It's fair to say about immigrants today, I think, that they not only speak to who we are as a people, but they kind of expose us as a people as well. And as an immigrant, Juan had a different perspective. He wasn't a fan, for example, of identity politics to the extent that they created barriers between people. I think I always viewed him as kind of a natural unifier, kind of a searcher for common ground. Some years ago, I tell this story, I shared a report that I wrote with Juan. He was always interested, as a former editor, he was always interested in the work of his friends, in what they were thinking, what they were writing. And the report argued, among other things, that all removal cases should go before an immigration judge. That's something that I strongly believe. It's something that a lot of people strongly do not believe in. Clearly, I came across Sarah Huckabee Sanders' statement that just because you don't see a judge doesn't mean you aren't receiving due process. I think, yes, that's exactly what that means. That's totally what it means. In any event, Juan told me that he found the report difficult to read because it was so at odds with his day-to-day experiences and challenges. And I totally understand that. It's one thing to think and write and to advocate on how our laws and our systems ought to be structured. It's entirely another thing to wake up every day and to try to work effectively within the government with all the pressures and all of the challenges and the diverse interests and players and roles. And Juan always respected people with different views and was never sneering or contemptuous or dismissive, not just in public, but even in private. I never remember being that way at all about people that he differed with. He worked in government for 17 years in 4 different administrations, which is remarkable. And it always gave me great comfort to know that he was a public servant and that a lot of you, Ali and others, were public servants as well. He actually tendered his resignation on the day that James Comey was fired. I don't know if people know that, but he did. And 2 months later, he spoke at the Center for Migration Studies quite dispassionately about how the administration and Jeff Sessions in particular viewed immigration through an enforcement and security lens. Well, we know that, right? But I was really impressed with how he tried to fairly convey Sessions' perspective, not to agree with it, but to try to help other people to understand it. Yet I see that Sessions recently has kind of praised himself during his tenure as Attorney General for a strong commitment to the rule of law. I'm not Juan Osuna, actually. I'm not quite as fair as he was. Yet, and for me, it was Juan, and I think for a lot of us, who kind of genuinely championed that concept of the rule of law. And here's why. Because the rule of law, it's not about erecting insurmountable technical barriers to asylum or denying access to asylum to people at our borders. It's not about sending asylum seekers and migrants back to their countries of origin immediately with no judges or court cases, as the president has proposed. It's not about separating children from their parents or indefinitely detaining children with their parents or indefinitely detaining anyone for that matter. It's not about mandating detention without individualized custody hearings, not about divesting people of legal status, turning legally present immigrants into undocumented people. It's not about denying legal status to residents who are American in everything but their immigration papers. Not about eliminating due process from the overwhelming majority of removal cases. It doesn't require spending 50 times more on the enforcement system than on the courts that hear the cases coming from the enforcement system. It's not about treating the U.S. Constitution's 14th Amendment as an immigration loophole that can be dispensed with by executive decree. And the rule of law is not the same as rule by law. If it was, then the tyrants and the totalitarian regimes would be the great champions of the rule of law, but they're not. I think as Juan knew, the rule of law is about due process, access to justice, and legal representation. It's about living up to the letter and to the spirit of the law and adhering to our nation's international commitments to refugees, torture survivors, and others. It's about recognizing that human rights apply to persons and not just citizens. It's about the separation of powers. It's about strongly enforcing the law, yes, but in ways that respect fundamental rights and the nation's fundamental law, which in our case is the U.S. Constitution. It's about making government officials and institutions accountable to the law, not allowing them to put themselves above it. It's about strengthening those institutions, like the press and civil society, which permit informed and meaningful participation in society. The rule of law requires, it demands competent, ethical, independent, and sufficiently resourced courts. And it also speaks to the legitimacy and the inclusiveness of the political system that gives rise to the laws. Juan Osuna had a lifelong commitment to the rule of law, understood in that way. He also, and I'm sure we all had a lot in common with him, but one of the things that I had in common with him is that we kept logs and we jotted down inspiring notes, quotes. And here are three from my journal as I look back on it that made me think about my friend and colleague, Juan Osuna, of 25 years, who was an empathetic man, a humble man, and a real leader. The first is from C.S. Lewis, and it goes, "Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's about thinking less about yourself." The second is from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and it's fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. I think that's Juan Osuna in a nutshell for me. And then finally, from Abraham Lincoln, it's not the years in your life that matter, but the life in your years. And he poured in a lot of life into those years. I'm very glad that we're here together today to honor and to remember Juan. I wanted to particularly thank the moderators of our panels that have kind of organized the content for today. Stevia Lair, who I've said I would really like him to just take over organizing my life because he's such a great organizer. I mean, things would be so much better for me if he would just do that. Just like another volume, you know, that's what I'd be like. Ben Johnson, Renee, Tara Magner for organizing this content. And also to CMS's terrific staff, Rachel Reyes and all these great people that we impose on as we do with all of the events that we do. And thanks to 3 board members who are here today, Karen Grisey, Linda Hartke, and of course our newest board member who is Wendy Young, so we're happy about that. And finally, thanks to the authors of the collection that we're putting together that's going to honor Juan. And we're still taking submissions if you guys are interested in writing, but Alyssa, Michaela, Eleanor, Renee, Catherine, and others. And now let me ask Alejandro Mayorkas. I think we're going to be pretty informal today, but we all know who each other, who we all are, right? So not a lot of kind of encomiums or descriptions of all of these great people who are speaking, but he's the former Deputy Secretary of DHS, and he's most of all a friend and an esteemed colleague of Juan's. And I'm very happy that he's here to make some opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Wendy, I'm incredibly honored to be here. I mentioned to Esther and Lucas a little while ago that every time I thought about what I wanted to say today, I just got really emotional, and I was hoping that I would have tapped all of that before actually this morning. I want to just mention something about what Don said. And that is the principle and the being of empathy. I've always thought that sympathy is a rather accessible and easy emotion to have. It's easy to feel for others. It's really the beautiful and big and rarer and purer hearts that actually feel for others and with them as well. And it's that feeling of with others and understanding and being in the shoes and in the bodies of their suffering that really distinguishes leaders and servants and people like all of yourselves, and especially Juan and Wendy, who dedicate their lives to improving the lives of those with whom you feel and who are less fortunate. And if we take a look and really think about the great milestones in immigration law and policy, the heart of those milestones is indeed empathy. If we think about Plyler versus Doe, June 15th, 1982, and then fast forward 30 years to the day, the 30-year anniversary of Plyler versus Doe was the announcement by our former president of the DACA program. And at the heart of both Plyler and the DACA program is a very core principle that I think defines Juan, defines Wendy, and defines the work of so many of you. And that is the core principle that a Doe actually has a name. Actually has a name, is a person, and deserves a future. And that is the heart and principle that defined, I think, Juan throughout his extraordinary career. I really got to know Juan not during one of the great milestones in immigration law and policy, but really as a shadow was being cast on the hope and aspirations of those of us in the Obama administration that were thinking that we were really just going to go for it. Unabashed, unadulterated, unmitigated quest for progressivism. And in the first, as I think many of you will remember, in the first phase of the Obama administration, the initial footprint of enforcement wasn't exactly in keeping with those hopes and aspirations. And I was at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services at the time, and I was asked to join a meeting with members of the community, stakeholders, you were called, at DHS headquarters, the Nebraska Avenue complex. Even though the issues were not mine, I was not in the enforcement arena. I was asked to be present. Maybe I could round a little bit of the edge that was going to characterize the meeting. And given the fact that Ben Johnson and Marshall Fitz were leading the charge, there was absolutely no hope that I could round the edge, nor, frankly, did the edge deserve to be rounded. It was an extremely difficult meeting, and following that meeting in the morning, I had lunch for the very first time with Juan, with whom I had sat around the table, but I had never really got to talk to him as a friend. And the lunch lasted much, much longer than either of us had time for. And I was lamenting more than the meeting from which I had just come. I was lamenting the reason why the meeting was being held, and how we were really conducting ourselves in a law and policy way completely antithetical to everything for which we had hoped. And Juan said something to me that I just have never forgotten, and it was extraordinarily beautiful. And he said, you know, you can't let the people who step on the flowers slow our journey to betterment. He just said it like that. I mean, it was extraordinarily poetic, and I went back to USCIS, and first I wrote that down, and second I actually gathered the leadership team together, and I said, you know, we're going to have to double down on our work, and we're going to have to stop shrinking from criticism, but we're going to have to really, really work extra hard not to deserve it. And born of that lunch was a new effort to reform our notice to appear policy. I spoke with Juan quite a lot about it. The enforcement machinery was in full bloom at the time, and the very least that we could do in one agency is make sure that another agency wasn't referred cases of those who frankly did not deserve to have that machinery confront their lives and their aspirations. And Juan was a driving force in that very, very significant material policy in other people's lives. We had occasion in the subsequent months to work around the table with one another. but we really sat at the table again on almost a daily basis, certainly weekly at the very least, when another shadow was cast on our hopes and aspirations, and that was in the summer of 2014, when many unaccompanied minors came to our border, and many families with children came to our border. And rather than really open our arms as our noblest traditions would require, we as a country really took the approach of deterrence, which I translated to keep your dreams and aspirations in your respective countries and manage them as you manage your struggles. And Juan shared with many of us a view that our country's refugee system historically and certainly at that time suffered a geographic bias against the Western Hemisphere and particularly the countries of the Northern Triangle. And steadfastly and quietly and softly, and one should not equate quiet and softness with weakness. One is a style, the other is a force. He worked on changing that geographic bias and seeing if we could institute for the first time in-country refugee processing, whether we could develop a Central American minors program, whether we could infuse those countries with the needed capital to make sure that at the very least, if these unaccompanied minors are struggling in a world that just is unacceptably hostile, then perhaps we could at least make tomorrow not so. You know, when I started in my professional career, I thought and I to this day think I was doing public interest work as a federal prosecutor. If one does one's job in that role correctly, one is a public interest lawyer. I was asked by someone because I worked really, really hard. I was asked why I worked so hard. And interestingly, the person who asked me that was my brother, because we all had a good work ethic, but I took it to a place of tremendous imbalance. And I said to him, you know, our mom, I didn't refer to her in that way. In a Spanish-speaking home, we didn't refer to her as mother or mom. But I said, you know, she never got to express herself in the wider world. She expressed herself very powerfully in our home and in the small circle around our home, but never in a broader way. She was twice a refugee in her life. And while the faults that I have in mine are certainly my own doing, through whatever I can accomplish in my work, it's my hope that people will get to know our mom. And it's through those successes that I will introduce her to a world that otherwise did not see her. And I think that all of you, through the work that you do in this incredibly important set of issues that so significantly impact other people's lives. I think you are able to continue to express Juan and everything he meant to us and to the millions of people who didn't have a chance to meet him, but whose lives were so profoundly touched by what he did. At the memorial service for Juan, his niece read a poem that she had written. And it is one of the most exquisite poems I have ever read, and I love poetry. I will not read it. Well, I was not going to read it all. Just because I was going to calibrate my emotional capacity to do so, and I was just going to read a couple choice lines. But I think in doing so, I would do disservice to the poem as a whole. So I'm going to read it all. And I will tell you, Wendy, that I keep the program and the beautiful artwork on its cover, really, on my desk. I don't do the, my sense of fulfillment seems to be inversely proportional to my income. The less money I make, the happier and more fulfilled I am as a person. I'm in a law firm like this one now, so I think you know how fulfilled I am. But I'm gonna read it. It's by Christina Osuna. I don't know the meaning of gentleman. I knew a man I called uncle who swapped stories with me about the flowers we passed in New York City, an ageless, genderless kind of love for goldenrod and orchids and agrimony. I knew bird lists and bookshelves and a procession of dogs following him from one room to the next, one his equal in temperament, large like a forest filled with wings and nests, a container made for holding multiplicity, love, dappled light. If we intend to learn from the dead, may we learn gentleness within and without, man or uncle, and celebrate their embodied meeting place.